Collyn Taylor of Gamecock Central joins us. The South Carolina Gamecocks are moving on to Gainesville for the super regional round of the NCAA baseball tournament. This guy covers it better than anybody. Collyn, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. I'm glad that I get to join you and talk some baseball in mid-June, now not early June. So first time in a while that we've been able to have that in Columbia. So it's awesome to join you and talk about a incredibly interesting super regional.
Well, I'll be honest. I've liked Carolina's team. You and I sat in the press box in Nashville, and I told you at times that looked like a team that could win it all. And then they started kicking the ball around, and I had to take that back a little bit. But when they're not kicking the ball around and they're healthy, they have looked that way. Now they got that draw, and I'll be honest. Campbell and NC State, I thought that was a tough 2-3 punch in that regional, and some uncertainty with the way Carolina ended the season. But my goodness, it's funny what happens when your whole team's available, and theirs isn't, but it's closer than it's been in a while. And that team this weekend, from what I could tell by box scores, I didn't get to watch a pitch of it from Nashville, but just judging by box scores, that looked a whole lot like the team that I thought could maybe win the whole thing back a couple of months ago.
Yeah, 100%. And this was a team that, you saw from those first 40 games when they started 34-6 that, they were hitting. They didn't hit for a great average, but they got on base, they hit for power, and they grinded pitchers down and got into the bullpen. And when you lose veteran pieces like a Will McGillis, who made his long-awaited real return in a regional, when you get Braylen Wimmer back in the field, they're 37-6 when he's starting at shortstop. When you get Talmage LeCroy back, and you have this entire stable of hitters to pair with what's been, for the most part, outside of a weekend or two bump in the road, a really good pitching staff, it's a dangerous team. And this is a South Carolina team that hit 357 as a team in that regional. They scored 33 runs in the 10 games leading up to the NCAA tournament and had 41 in 3 games. So this is a team that they got on base in over 50% of their plate appearances over the weekend. I mean, it was just this offense rolled, and the numbers show it, but even the eye test, it wasn't like a bunch of cheap hits where they're hitting numbers that they're booting or whatever. These were hard hit balls, hit to the opposite field, working pitch counts. They drew 13 full count walks over the course of the weekend, 13. That's something that South Carolina has been missing, and you saw that this weekend. Now, those are 2 good but not great pitching staffs, and now you got to go face 3 first-rounders potentially in Sproat, Waldrep, and Caglianone. And then that offense, it's a tougher test, but South Carolina looked like an Omaha team this weekend, and now they got to go beat an Omaha caliber team to get there. Starting Friday night.
Well, I mentioned getting pieces back. Messina missed part of the SEC tournament with what looked like a concussion. He was back. Wimmer has been back a little bit, but I think he's been DHing. I think he was back at
short.
Yeah. Who else do they have back this weekend that had been missing recently? This is so hard to keep up with from afar because there's been so much.
Yeah. McGillis was the big one. He had been out since week 2 of SEC play. He broke an arm, tried to come back in a midweek, and they put him in left field because Braylen Wimmer had been DHing, so they couldn't DH him. They put him back in the field. He tweaks his arm on a throw from left field, check swings, aggravates it again, has to come out, misses the last 2 weeks of the season with Tennessee and then the SEC tournament. They DH'd him all weekend at the leadoff spot, and he goes 5 of 13 with 2 home runs. Braylen Wimmer gets back at short. He goes 6 of 12. Cole Messina, obviously, coming back from that concussion. He scores 6 times, has 4 hits, walks 4 times. And then Talmage LeCroy is kind of an unsung hero of this group. He's been dealing with the hamstring since he missed the Florida series in April, and had kind of been in and out and just never fully healthy. Gets fully healthy, and now he's back at third really full-time and swinging the bat like he was before he went out with that hamstring injury. So you get him back, all of those hitters, and then you get Will Sanders back, who looked every bit of like a Friday night arm against Campbell, against Central Connecticut State, which, I mean, no disrespect to Central Connecticut State, but his performance against Campbell was the eye opener there. And now if you're South Carolina, you're feeling really good going down there to play a Florida team that is tough, but you already swept them once this year, and we're the better team for 27 innings of that series.
You kind of beat me to my next question a little bit. I was going to ask you, what were your meaningful takeaways? Because you offset it with, okay, they hadn't been playing well, they hadn't been scoring runs, and then the regional was something else entirely. Sanders obviously would be, if he performs like that, that's meaningful. What else did you take from an individual or team standpoint? I know you mentioned the walks that maybe has some meaning going into Gainesville.
It's one thing to do it against bad pitching. NC State threw their big arms against them for the most part. Campbell threw their best bullpen arms against them. Now, the regional did set up really well for them in terms of Campbell losing that first game and having to battle through a loser's bracket. But you did have to face a dangerous NC State team. It was more of the approach. South Carolina, I did the math. I don't have the number in front of me, but they saw, I want to say, close to 4 pitches per batter faced. Close to 5 pitches, 6 pitches, and at bat. You're talking about a team that, that didn't happen a ton over the course of that last month of the season, because there were a lot of young guys, a lot of guys that were being put into disadvantageous situations, whether it's their spot in the lineup, whether it's guys pressing and swinging at pitches they shouldn't swing at. There weren't a ton of swing and misses this weekend in Columbia, and that was huge for them. They were fouling pitches off. They were going opposite field. The biggest thing for me was less about, yes, the numbers are the numbers. They passed the eye test. They played great defense, which is not something the South Carolina team had been known for in its over the course of its regular season. You saw them in Nashville boot how many balls and just look out of sorts up there in a series that you look back on and say they probably should have won if they didn't commit so many errors. So they played great defense in the offensive approach where they're just grinding dudes down and getting to a team's bullpen and walking and making guys have 20, 25 pitch innings. That was back. And if you're South Carolina, that's something that you really hope can springboard you into this super against a Florida team that has at times walked guys and given up extra base hits.
All right. You sent me scrambling for my calculator in the midst of all that. So all this looking away and finger punching had a purpose. Central Connecticut threw Campbell threw 180 against South Carolina. Central Connecticut threw 220 pitches. That is not the way you want to start a regional.
It felt like more.
I bet it did. I don't know how many pickoff throws were in there too. And then 100 and I can't read my own writing. It says 160. I think it was more than that. Let me add this up again. 190. That's what it was. 190 pitches is what NC State had to throw against them. So what minimum there of 180 in 3 games. You mentioned Florida's issues with walking guys, and Florida gave a ton of free passes.
Yep.
We saw that series play out once in Columbia, and Carolina swept it. And that was a different season ago for both teams, though maybe not so much for Carolina. For Florida, the pitching has gotten better. Florida's developed some depth. Caglianone has been more consistent, but I think people are going to perceive this as Florida's going to win it. And my guess is Florida probably will win it. But, man, I just remember the way that series went, and Carolina kind of, I don't know if dominated is the right word, but won it decisively. And seeing Carolina do what it did, and I know Florida's gotten a lot better. I think that's the question. The question I have is what Florida staff will they face? And if I have the answer to that, then maybe I know. But that is not what I want to see if I'm Kevin O'Sullivan.
No.
Coming into this weekend.
No, and this is, I went into that Florida series in, what was that, late April, and realized, and even in that moment, I thought South Carolina was a bad matchup for that Florida team. Just like Kentucky, I thought was a really bad matchup for that South Carolina team when they were going up there. South Carolina wants to rely on getting on base, whether it's hits, hit by pitches, walks, and then hit for some power. And Florida's pitching staff, they don't allow a lot of hits. But they do walk some guys. And when guys make contact, they have a tendency to get up extra base hits. So it's not a great matchup for Florida's pitching staff. And if you're South Carolina, you're starting James Hicks, who's a sinker baller for the most part, likes to keep the ball down in the zone. Florida loves to hit home runs. They're not a high on base team for the most part. You hope that if you're South Carolina, the biggest key from that series sweep at Founders earlier this year is Florida hit 3 home runs in that series. All 3 were solo home runs. They didn't allow guys to hit 2 or 3 run jacks in that series. And when they don't do that, Florida has a hard time scoring. And that's huge for South Carolina. If they can limit the home runs, easier said than done against that Florida lineup, and get on base and scrap and claw, then you have a shot at beating this Florida team. And I was looking at the math. Florida, against teams that finish top half of the SEC and SEC play only in team ERA, Florida's hitting 50 points less on average against those staffs than they are against teams that finish the bottom half of team ERA. And 6 of their 10 SEC losses came against teams that ranked in the top half of the SEC in team ERA. So, and South Carolina was one of those teams. So if you're South Carolina, you have the pitching to go up against this lineup. It's just a matter of getting to those starters and really taxing that bullpen in game 1 to then have a shot at games 2 and games 3 to really get into that bullpen and take advantage of it.
I don't know if it changed the last few weekends of the year, but I'd heard Florida had some trouble with lefties, and I think particularly good lefties. Does that change what Carolina might do? How can Carolina match up in that regard?
Like left-handed pitching?
Yes.
Yeah, that's Matthew Becker's really their only good, viable left-handed option right now, and that's something that's kind of been a bugaboo for a while for South Carolina. They just haven't had 2 or 3 lefties on the staff you can turn to on a consistent basis. And if they use Will Sanders out of the bullpen in games 1 or games 2, Matthew Becker is their lefty who's been kind of up and down in his career. He pitched really well against Florida earlier in the season. Only gave up 2 solo home runs and 5 hits over 5 innings, or 2 hits, both solo home runs in 5 innings. That's really their only left-handed option. And then if they want to use Will Sanders for game 3, then Becker can come in there and be a really key high-leverage bullpen guy for a Florida team that just, again, does not hit lefties all that well. But it's ironic because Becker has told me, he's like, I prefer pitching to righties versus lefties, which is odd given the fact that he's a left-handed pitcher and the matchups would suggest otherwise.
How did Sproat and Waldrep do against Carolina the first time around? Because it has been really erratic. Those guys can dominate one weekend and get blown up the next. And with Waldrep in particular, it's control, I believe. Yeah,
Sproat was interesting. He lasted 5 2/3 against them, gave up 4 earned, struck out 8, but also gave up a home run and 2 doubles. And they chased him. They drew a couple walks in that, I guess it would be the 6th inning. And that was that big 6th where I think they walked like 4 straight times with 2 outs and got some big hits along the way there. Waldrep gave up 2 early home runs against South Carolina and then settled in after that. So that was the big thing. He left a splitter up early against Ethan Petrie, and he put a really good swing on it and then settled down. I think he struck out 10 over the course of 6 innings. And then they chased Caglianone pretty early in that one. But they took advantage of some walks from all 3 of those guys and hit for a ton of power against them too.
What is your perception of how that park plays? It's hard to find park factors anymore, and I think that park is still only, 2, 3, 4 years old?
You can hit for some power there. That park plays pretty small at times, especially in Florida when the air gets hot and you're able to kind of cut through it. There's supposed to be some rain in the forecast this weekend. I don't know if it'll affect any of the games, but how that looks with humidity and if the air's humid to the point where if the ball doesn't travel maybe as far as it would on just a normal summer day, that's a key, but it can play pretty big or pretty small, I should say.
Yeah.
for those teams. And you've seen that reflected with Florida's home run numbers to a degree, especially at home.
Well, I guess to better phrase it, I wonder if the park plays small or if it's any park's going to play small when you got Caglianone and
Yeah.
and some of the guys that they've got in their lineup. But Riopel, I mean, he hits the ball. It seems like it's 400 plus every time he makes contact anymore.
Yeah.
I guess the point I'm making, maybe it doesn't make a difference because it's not like Ethan Petrie and
Cole Messina,
those guys.
Yeah.
We're hitting cheapies either.
Right. Yeah. Prepare for fireworks down there because these are two staffs that when these two pitching staffs at times have been known to give up a home run or two, especially the Mahoneys, the Sanders, and the Hickses at times. And obviously Sproat, Waldrep, and all of those guys can give up some bombs too. So prepare for some fireworks down there in Gainesville this weekend, point blank period.
Yeah, there's also the White Langford guy too. I knew
he's
someone.
Yeah, that Langford guy can swing it a little bit too, right?
Were you around? I remember one year, I think it was Georgia and Carolina were playing in the Super.
5 straight?
Carolina, was it 5? I was going to say 5. I remember I was in a gym watching it. And it was just like every ball got out. It was crazy to watch. It might be what we see this weekend. Yeah,
that might be that. And now, granted, that Georgia's park is a little bit different than Florida's. I mean, that short porch in right field, I think I could hit a home run to that short porch if I get it up in the wind. But yeah, it'll be very similar to that, where I think, the pitching numbers might be skewed just and not reflective of how good guys might be pitching, because these two lineups, when they're on, can hit for a ton of power, and that makes it a lot of fun.
What else are you expecting this series? Is there anything that we should be watching for here that maybe we've not gotten into?
It's really just the biggest thing that I've kind of fallen back on is the approach. And if South Carolina can copy and paste what they did this past weekend when they're fully healthy and do it again against an opponent they did that with last time out, but that has gotten better, especially fortifying its bullpen. That was a Florida weakness earlier in the year. If they can stick to that approach and chase guys on work counts against really quality, high strikeout arms, South Carolina has a really good shot to go down there and win. And if not, then Florida's the favorite for a reason. And that's kind of it's going to be tough to put runs up against that pitching staff. And it'll be even tougher to go out there and ask James Hicks and Jack Mahoney to be perfect through those first 2 games to force a game 3.
I'm looking at all the supers this weekend. I'm having a hard time finding a more compelling matchup than this one, given the way it went down the first time.
Oh, this is by far and away the best super regional matchup on the board. And I'm probably a little biased because I cover one of these teams, but I know the history. I know Florida eliminated South Carolina from the SEC tournament last year in a game that South Carolina, had a lot of chances to win, and that's kind of what fueled them over the course of the season. They thought about that Florida game a ton, and there's, Will Sanders doesn't like Florida all that much. Ethan Petrie's a Florida kid, so there are some ties there where, this would be really sweet for South Carolina to go down there and win a super and have Florida lose its first super regional since 2009, which is kind of insane to me. They have not lost. They've either been bounced in a regional or made it to the College World Series since 2009. They have not lost a super regional since then. So there's a lot at stake here. And for South Carolina, it would make getting back to Omaha for the first time since I cannot believe it's been this long, 2012. It would make it that much sweeter.
Gut feeling, what happens when this is done?
I'm going to say Florida in 3. I just think that lineup is too good. And Florida's been really good at home. I just can't see Florida. And like I said, they haven't lost a super since 2009. I just can't see that talent of a Florida team not making it to Omaha.
Yeah, that's my gut feeling too. I thought that coming into the tournament, Florida was my pick to win the whole thing, given the way that the pitching came along late. But the beauty of the series, man, is we've seen it play out differently once, and given the health and all the things you mentioned, if this ends differently and Carolina advances to Omaha, I think we probably have named the reasons why in the last 20 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if you told me South Carolina went down there and won, I'd fully believe you, just because of how well they played last weekend, them getting a full stable back. And, we forget too, yes, Florida was without Brandon Neely in that South Carolina series for that inane ejection.
Suspension.
Yeah. But South Carolina was without Will McGillis and Talmage LeCroy in that series. And Gavin Casas gets hurt two at-bats, 2 innings into it, with Wyatt Langford running into him at first base, and he missed the last 2 games. So in reality, South Carolina is bringing 3 guys that didn't really play a ton into that series, into a super, and all 3 guys were incredibly valuable. Heck, Gavin Casas was the regional MVP. So I'm interested to see how they impact the roster, and if South Carolina, I think they have a legitimate shot to go down there and take 2 out of 3, even with Florida being the favorite.
Collyn, you guys will have it covered. Tell the folks out there where to find it.
Yeah, absolutely. Gamecock Central, part of the On3 network. You can find us there. Just type in GamecockCentral.com. It'll take you right there. And you can find us on social media everywhere. It's just Gamecock Central, all one word. And we'll have you covered left, right, top to bottom, sideways, around, back, down there in Gainesville.
And when that's over, there is the football season around the corner, which you guys cover a little bit too.
Yeah, that's don't remind me.
Yeah,
right. Don't remind me. This is the time of year where people are doing countdowns to kickoff, and I'm like, baseball's consuming every thought right now. I don't need to be thinking about football at the same time.
No, I get it. Well, hey, thanks for joining us. If Carolina is going to Omaha, then we'll have you on again. So
absolutely.
What about if it happens?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope I'm on with you in a couple days' time then.
That'd be nice.
Yep.
All right. Well, he's Collyn Taylor of Gamecock Central. I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 14. Thanks for watching. Best way to follow our coverage, hit the subscribe button, enable your notifications, hit the like button. That helps us get noticed. Thanks for watching us at Southeastern 14. More content on the way very soon.